This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
In December 2010, Union College brought 15 students from all classes, majors, and economic backgrounds to Louisiana for 2 weeks. We went to study the sociological effects of Hurricane Katrina and to help with Katrina relief. We also took a look at the impact of the oil industry and the radical loss of wetlands in southern Louisiana.
You could do it. I'm Shabana, I'm from New York.
That's me. I was one of those students. After 3 flights and a couple of car rides, we were all tired and hungry. Some more than others.
So that we may reseat you.
I'm really ready to have a po' boy.
Nonetheless, all of our travel anxieties disappeared when we got in the vans for our final destination, New Orleans.
Yay! Yay! It's a little warmer and we just got in the vans.
We were all super excited, but each of us had our own reasons for going on this trip.
I kind of wanted to do the mini term because I haven't traveled a lot in the U.S. and I wanted to see what was in the South.
I really wanted to do community service. That's like something that I've been trying to get into.
Because I had been down to New Orleans before, and I had come in 2005, and I wanted to see what the differences would be between 2005 and 2010.
After a day settling in, we finally got to work with Pinola.
My name's Jen. I'm the volunteer coordinator and entrancy liaison and site supervisor for Phoenix of New Orleans. And what you guys will be working on is an area of our programs we refer to as direct assistance or homeowner retention, which is coming in and providing volunteer labor to alleviate the cost of contracted labor for homeowners. A lot of homeowners down here are really vulnerable to fraud from contractors. A lot of problems we see in the city is contractors come in, do no work, shitty work, or do a great job but then leave it unfinished and just bail.
This is day 1 of our building experience with Pinola.
Coming towards her, stuck still, no turning back. She hid around corners and she hid under beds. She killed it with kisses and from it she fled. With every bubble she sang.
Day 4 New Orleans, day 3 working on this great house.
Way down the kitchen sink. The dog days are over. The dog days are done. The horses are coming, so you better run. Run fast for your mother, run fast for your father. Run for your children, for your sisters and brothers. Leave all your love and your longing behind. You can't carry it with you if you want to survive. The dog days are over. The dog days are done. Can you hear the horses? 'Cause you're like
During one of our lunch breaks, a friendly old man invited us to join him for a meal down the block.
Eating some delicious food at a church that has free meals on Wednesdays.
It's good.
We're just glad to have y'all here to eat with us in this holiday season.
Working on this house was amazing. But what really happened in New Orleans in 2005? We went on a disaster tour with Jim, the co-founder of Pinola, and learned that Hurricane Katrina was a bit more than a little breaching.
When Hurricane Katrina made landfall, it came on as a Category 3, so a weaker hurricane. But 12 hours previous, it had been a Category 5. And since it had such a sharp decline in speed, people thought, okay, well, this isn't as big of a deal. We sort of dodged a bullet here. What a lot of people didn't realize, though, is that it was still carrying more typical of a Category 5 storm surge with it.
Over the past decade, the devastating decrease in wetlands and buffer zones have had a dramatic impact on the intensity of storm surges in Louisiana. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. The damage and destruction caused by the hurricane makes it the most expensive natural disaster in U.S. history. The majority of the destruction was due to the storm surge.
We're at the 17th Street Canal. As I mentioned in the van, this is an outflow canal. You've got smaller tributary canals that are connected to the storm drains throughout the city. So the water goes in the storm drain, into the tributary canal, which then pumped into the outflow canals, there's 3 of them, and then from the outflow canal, that's pumped out into the lake. It is deeper than the wall would suggest, so like behind the wall, it kind of, it's got a little bowl to it. And typically the water's never, even if they're a hard rainstorm, there wouldn't ever be water, against the walls. It wouldn't even fill up that whole bowl. So the walls are there to protect against storm surge. Prior to the hurricane, there was 5 houses that sat, in this fenced-in area. A fence wasn't there at that point. So it's 5 different people's homes. The 3 in the middle just washed out completely when the wall fell over, so just pushed them off the foundation. And the other 2 are so significantly damaged that they had to get bulldozed. It is the Army Corps' fault that it fell over. When they built it in the 60s, they didn't build it to the proper specifications. So what that means specifically is that the way the wall is built is you've got steel, like interlocking steel sheets that are driven down into the ground, and then that's capped off with concrete. So it's not like that concrete's just sitting on top of a little hill right there. There's literally, most of the wall is actually underneath of the ground. So the reason why they do that is to counteract the force of the water pushing against the top of the wall. So think about it like this: on 2 hands is the walls. When you have water filling up towards the top, it's going to push against the top of those walls and try to push them outward. The deeper you are into the ground here, the more that it's going to counteract that force. So the problem is that they didn't drive it deep enough into the ground so the force of the water at the top is stronger than the force of the resistance at the bottom. So they pushed out too far, which created gaps at the bottoms of each of the walls, and water actually started going underneath of the wall and then popped out on the other side, which undermined the foundation to the point where the wall fell over. What you had was 22 to 23 foot of storm surge coming across, coming on shore when it made landfall. So it's the force of it is pretty amazing. It's like trucks up up on top of houses. Trees just totally knocked over by the force of the water. It's pretty amazing. One of the common misconceptions, I think, is that the storm disproportionately affected poor people. What you have to understand about New Orleans is that it was probably the poorest, if not the second poorest city in the country. So if 80% of a really poor city floods, you're going to have a lot of poor people affected. That's mathematically, going to happen. So citywide, your evacuation rate was only about 3/4. So there's 464,000 people who lived here before the storm. 125,000 plus didn't evacuate. A lot of people who live in the older neighborhoods, like their great-grandfather built their house, it's been their family. Their family's the only family that's ever owned a house. So there's a lot more like sentimental connection to the not only to the structure itself, but also to the neighborhood. This lady Pam, who worked in her house, her mom lived 2 blocks down. Her sister lived across the street. Her brother lived next door. Her best friend from high school lived catty corner across the street. She did not know a single person who lived more than 30 blocks from her. So everybody was in that same boat. She didn't have, a relative, up north to go stay with or any of that. So while she had a car, she had nowhere to go. So you can see how that's sort of a challenge there as well.
After this tour, I thought people were crazy for living in Louisiana, but every person has their reasons and their doubts.
Hi, I'm Carl Winkler. I am a Union alum, 09, and now I live in New Orleans and I go to Tulane Medical School. I like how rich the culture is for such a small city. Really not that many people live here, and I would say, especially in terms of live music and food, I would put it up against any city 10 times its size.
Well, I've lived here all my life. Been through some bad storms. Katrina was one of the worst. But it was really something, and never seen water like that.
I'm Katie Williams. I am from Mandeville, Louisiana. I am a publisher.
And where were you the day that Hurricane Katrina made its
touchdown?
No, made its touchdown, yeah.
I was actually in Covington, Louisiana. I was urged to go to a hospital and stay there just for safety purposes, to get everybody out of their houses because it was a mandatory evacuation. They started talking about the storm, about Katrina, and it took several days for them to let us know how big it was. And at that point, you're trying to figure out where you're going to stay, how many people do you need, it's a convoy, people are trying to pack all their things. So with that, the roads start to get really full and all the hotels fill up. So you can get on the road, there's no gasoline, there's no way to stop. So you could be going, you know, for 6 hours and in traffic, but you don't go anywhere. So then you're essentially stuck in your vehicle for the storm. And with flooding and things, you're better off just staying at home.
Would you ever want to move because of the storms and the flooding?
No. No. I know that sounds crazy, but no.
I'm Courtney Duchesne. I'm a freshman at Tulane University. I'm from Schenectady, New York. It's just such a cool city, and it's so different. It's the culture, the food, like, you know, the music. It's a different way of life.
So we had to go discover the food and culture of New Orleans. Our first stop was for Po' Boys, the New Orleans version of a sub.
We're at this wonderful homeboy place. I'm waiting to get my catfish bowl. It's gonna be lovely.
Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-I.
Next was Zydeco level at Rockpool.
Was built in 1955, was open until 1995 when the mother, Vivian Blair, died. The only grocery stores and gas station stuff that we have in the neighborhood, one is Israeli American owned. Down here is Vietnamese American owned. Across the street from it is Palestinian American owned. None of those people live in this neighborhood. So when you spend money there, the money goes out of your neighborhood. And what does it do to your economy? It consistently regrinds your economy back down. There's nowhere to spend money in the neighborhood that reinvests back into the neighborhood. How is it I'm going to go about making social change in this neighborhood?
So Nat Turner did just that. He has been maintaining an urban farm in hopes of educating and restoring the lower Ninth Ward community for generations to come. Turner explained that community development is a long-term process. There are many people who do a bit of community service here and there just to make themselves feel progressive. Nonetheless, that help is temporary and doesn't benefit the community in the long run. Less fortunate communities need more help in understanding the ways that they can improve the well-being of their futures.
Nobody gives you a chance or a dollar in this old town.
I've always felt kind of like a connection to Louisiana, but I've never lived here. And my aunt is from Shreveport, but she was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, and she had to evacuate. But she had a very different experience now that I've seen everything that's gone on down here. But that's kind of like why I wanted to come down. And then once I am here, it's just, you know, you don't get it until you see it. And you still don't even get it when you see it because you're not in it.
It was the brash reality of the situation and listening to the speakers from all different backgrounds and different races have the same opinion on the governmental structure of the city. And that to me was really shocking, and to hear about the racial profiling and the classist behavior that you find in like such a small metropolitan area. The citizens here don't trust the police because the police can't be trusted, because they'll harass you if you're a minority or you're from a different area or if you're alternative in any way, shape, or form. Because they talked about like those kids that really don't have a place to be and don't have anyone that will stand up for them, and how the local government takes advantage of them and manipulates their situation and holds people in jail if they can't pay for a ticket in order to make sure that the person in charge makes money. I think that was really interesting and also heartbreaking at the same time to hear.
It definitely seemed like in New Orleans things have gotten a lot better. Like, you know, it seems like they're kind of at a point where if the house got really destroyed, like it's either demolished or repaired now. Like there are a lot of houses are, you know, still being repaired, but I feel like they kind of have a handle on it, you know?
Dulac, Louisiana is just southwest of New Orleans. The wetlands here were once freshwater, but human influence has drastically impacted these ecosystems.
Morning. My name is Mel Landry. I work for the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program. So what you're standing in is a historic delta. The Mississippi River used to flow through right here, basically. When it would flood in the spring, all this land would be covered with fresh water. There were cypress forests down here, freshwater swamps. But when the river changed courses, all that began to subside. Subsidence is natural. It's the compaction of the soil. When the river would deposit that soil, it would deposit it very loosely. The river carries soil from 32 states and 3 Canadian provinces. When it comes down, it deposits that soil in coastal Louisiana, and over time, that loosely settled, richly organic soil compacts, it sinks. And that's why coastal Louisiana is disappearing. Historically, the Mississippi River would lay new sediment on top of old sediment. It would switch deltas, go back to old deltas, and build that land up faster than it was subsiding. But when we channelized the Mississippi River, put levees along it, and no longer got to change course or flood in the spring, all we had left was that subsidence. Coastal Louisiana loses a football field of land every 38 minutes.
In addition, the levees prevent the Mississippi from flooding and replenishing the soils with the sediment that it carries. All of that sediment every year gets shot off the shelf of the Gulf of Mexico instead of replenishing the land.
There are a few ways to solve that problem. It all comes down to money. A lot of people's first inclination will say, well, the river built it, just let the river flow. Let it run free. Well, the problem with that is we live here now. It's just not something that you can feasibly do politically. The other important thing is you guys drove down there and saw that big old port complex down there. That port services 1/3 of all the domestic oil production that comes into the United States. It's supplied through that port, the pipelines run through here, all that infrastructure is protected by our wetlands. So it's the economy of the nation that depends on these coastal wetlands. Coastal wetlands, you guys might have heard, help protect against storm surge. The friction of the wetlands and the elevation help knock down storm surge before it gets to our major metropolitan areas. Of course, because the wetlands are disappearing, so we're becoming more and more vulnerable.
Most of the southern Louisiana community works either in the fishing industry or the oil industry. As the oil industry got bigger, more of the wetlands got destroyed. Oil rig canals created disruptions in the land. Eventually, erosion increased the size of these canal disruptions and created a pathway for saltwater to encroach in from the Gulf of Mexico, destroying freshwater ecosystems. Essentially, we are losing land faster than we are replenishing it, which is why wetlands continue to be submerged underwater and why Louisiana has been continuously sinking.
So what we're out here to do today is restore some of that. Where you guys are going to be, you'll see we're going to go through some channels, and then we're going to get into an area that's a lot of open water. All that used to be marsh, and now it's sunk below the surface, and it's open water. When this port was expanding, they were digging a new slip, and they took that material, they sucked it up into a dredge, and they pumped that material to where we're going. And they built new wetlands, they built hundreds of acres of wetlands, and they restored a natural ridge that used to be next to an old channel there. And we're going to be working on that ridge. That ridge is really important, not only for the things we talked about, the value of the wetlands and hurricane storm protection, but it's also very important to neotropical migratory birds. We're right in the middle of one of the world's major flyways. When the birds fly south in the winter, they fly right over coastal Louisiana, and when they fly back north in the summer, they fly back over it again. When they fly back north, they have to cross the Gulf of Mexico to get here. When they get here, they're really tired, they're exhausted, they're thirsty, they're hungry, and they need a place to rest. This used to all have, this coastal Louisiana used to have maritime forest on all its barrier islands, and at the mouth of the river you would find cypress forest and bottomland hardwoods. Because we're sinking, all that's disappearing. A lot of it's turned to marsh, and that marsh has turned to open water. So now when they get here, there's no place for them to land. They need fresh water, which this is salt water, it doesn't provide. They need shelter, which marsh grass doesn't provide. They really need trees, and they need food, which the marsh grass doesn't provide. They need nuts and berries and that sort of thing. So on this ridge, because we've got that elevation, we can plant trees that provide that habitat. So it's really important to those birds because it's one of the last places where they can stop and land.
So that day, we planted 1,000 oak trees in hopes of restoring the tree community on the ridge for neotropical bird migration. It was just one more step towards wetland restoration. The marshes are changing every day due to human development. All the freshwater critters moved up north where saltwater did not interfere with their lifestyles, and thousands of cypress trees died, leaving behind a vast tree graveyard. Nonetheless, hurricanes and storm surges are still ripping through the wetlands, canals are still being dug, rigs are still drilling, and saltwater is slowly making its way up the bayou. Although we made an impact on this ridge, there are many other ridges out there that need improvement. The restoration of these diverse freshwater communities will only continue to accelerate with national recognition.
Well, there's like this one particular house that we wanted to clear out the front yard and like the grass and stuff like that, and we did that, and that was great. And then the couple, they were two like mentally retarded people living together, and one was in a wheelchair, and I guess he broke a tile in the bathroom, so we were like, yeah, let's go in and fix tiles. We've done that in New Orleans, and so we go in to fix it, and we start ripping out all the tiles, and we realize there's mold everywhere, and it was very frustrating because initially we thought we could tackle this. It was like no big deal, and then we get started, and it's this huge project.
We're tearing up the floor because in the middle of it, it's really weak and there's mold in the wood, which means that it can collapse at any time. So they're gonna actually take that beam out and replace it with plywood. Now, we don't have the manpower, know-how, or the tools to actually put in a piece that can handle that. So the house is like dilapidated at any point in time, could collapse.
Wait, so my question is, like, even though we're mal-equipped to do such a procedure, what should we do? Just like leave it?
We can't just leave it. But I feel that we raise money, right? So the money that we have, why don't we give it to the community and have people who actually have the know-how come in here and do the repairs? This is some like.
Think about how many people, how many houses they have to fix. Though, how much money would they need? They need a lot more than what we have given. There's no way that all of the money that we donated could go straight for that cause. And it would require so much money to hire someone to do all these things.
I mean, the poverty in this community is really beyond anything I've seen anywhere else. And it's really, really painful, really hard. That's the thing that, that so many people really live with. I mean, that's what's so hard, is to see that this may be the best that these people get. And we're not in a position to go in there and move them out, put them into, I mean, they ought to be in some kind of supported living environment with people who really care for them. And they don't have that, and we can't be that. So it's a really hard thing for us to deal with. Because I mean, none of us feel good just walking away from these people. We'd all like to do something. We'd like to give them the life that they really ought to have. And I don't see how we can. And that's really hard to come up hard against. So we need to think about what we can learn from it, what we can take away from it. We may decide that we're not going to stay at this place, that we're not going to work at it. And we have to each find our way to make peace with that. It's a tough one.
People depend on us to try to make those ends meet for them. It costs no less than $35,000 to elevate a house. When you're already looking at people who probably live paycheck to paycheck, commercial fishing is not a continuous job. You have seasons. And even if you meet seasons, then you gotta have a little bit of money extra, saved in the bank, which is not always the case. Like the oil spill did to us this year, or if we have a major storm, we have to evacuate. So savings are things that we just don't have. And so when you get X amount of money from FEMA or from your insurance, you have to spend all your money to elevate your house, and probably a little bit less to either restore it. I was telling James earlier too that we had one example after Gustav and I, where we actually had to buy mattresses for people because people were drying out their mattresses and using those to sleep on that had gone under 5 feet of water. And again, it's not because they just thought, that was perfectly safe. When you only get X amount of dollars and you don't have any more dollars, you do what you can. And then unfortunately, it's because your health always comes second. It's because of all the wetlands loss that we're having to fight year after year. And we have to fight year after year. Every hurricane season now could be a tragic one, meaning it could bring 8-foot tidal surge into our community and bring 5 feet of water in our house. Every last storm is a threat to us now. It's not like we choose to live in these conditions. It's that these conditions have just been forced on us. As a community, we were very, as a Native people rather, and we're mostly members of the Homa tribe. We're 17,000 people stretched over 7 parishes. And as a people, we lived on the bluffs. We were mound builders. And every time the Mississippi River would flood, it would deposit sediment, it would build us new land, but we expected it, and we would live on the bluffs during flood season, during that 5 or 6 months of hurricane season. But people came in and saw that New Orleans was a very profitable port and started putting levees and doing all this stuff very unnatural to the Mississippi River, and we're sort of stuck in this position. We can't undo hundreds of years of damage. All these conditions that just keep getting worse for us. Again, my dad was a commercial fisherman. Now there's a big threat of imports, so a lot of our fishermen are no longer able to feed their families because there's a threat of imports, or they have to go out further because there's so much saltwater intrusion, or the price is no good, again, because of the imports, or the gas prices are so high that they can't, fuel their boats to be able to go out and make these trips. And now we have the oil spill where all of our fishermen couldn't work for 4 to 5 months. So it's very easy for people to come in who have more money and say, hey, Jimmy, I'll give you this much money for your house and your property. And there you go. Someone else who's born and bred in this community is gone. And what do you have left is a camp or a second home. These are private owned properties that gets resold to private individuals. A lot of us are concerned that people are trying to create sportsman's paradise. And so there's that question that when will it ever end? When will people invest in a community to live in and not sportsman's paradise? But we got to also encourage local people to stay here and want to rebuild and want to make things happen for younger people.
Towards the end of our trip, we worked on a different house. Upon the homeowner's request, we painted with an ever so cheerful bright green. With our palettes refreshed and a beautiful day, our last group community service task definitely brought our spirits back up.
I definitely wasn't ready for Dulac. I didn't really know much about it.
In Dulac, I would say the living conditions of people here. That was the most startling, because I never saw myself as a privileged individual.
It's just like the couple that we were working on the house for before. They want to leave, and it's a dream, but it's something that most unlikely they will never be able to do, just because they don't have the economic or social means to do so.
And coming down here, you realize that, well, I felt that the work I've done is nothing compared to the work that these people do all the time just to get by.
This is my first time seeing this kind of history, and it's really opened my eyes to and how it's not perfect, but there's a lot.
Compared to being down here in the more rural areas with less money, I guess, down here that's more of a way of life, whereas with New Orleans, like, it just happened once and like they're just trying to repair it, you know, and then eventually they'll get back to where they were before.
It's so much more that goes with it than just poverty.
Small communities are often neglected and overlooked.
You know, when you think Louisiana, you think New Orleans, when you think Hurricane Katrina, you think New Orleans. And there's just so much more, like, everywhere in the world, not just here too.
It's like, you hear about New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans in the media, but you never hear about these small communities out here. They don't get any help or assistance, and that needs to change.
I really used to want to kind of go overseas and do work there, but now it kind of has shown me that how much work can really be done in everyone's backyard within the States, and like how you could really kind of lend a hand out to people much closer to you.
So, what if the world ended today? What would you have wanted to contribute to this world? I know that if the world ended today, I would have really wanted to make a full impact. This experience has showed me that the best way to make a full impact is through full-time community service volunteering. Even though it's the best way to make your impact on the world, it's also the most heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, there is a certain balance that's achieved between the two. The story is never ending. The story is developing as we speak. So if not now, then when? If not me,